And here is my good friend Miriam Drori. My name is Rachelle Kaufman, and we're going to speak today about meditation. And I've been recently becoming very involved in it myself. And Miriam, through her experience, has a lot more experience with it. And I'm going to have her shed a little bit of light on exactly what meditation is. Why is it so mainstream now? Like, why is everybody so into it now? What can we accomplish with meditation? I mean, what can we do? Some of us are seeking to make some kind of a connection with God or a connection with some part of ourselves that we can't normally connect to. And how does that differ from prayer? Or is prayer a form of meditation?
I think that prayer was always meant to be a meditation, and that the prayer has all the tools in it to allow us, especially, we come from the Jewish tradition, and for me, as a seeker of God from a very young age, also, I felt that, and as a mother later on in life, I felt that we're sinning towards the Jewish tradition. We're sinning towards the people who are naturally seeking God by forcing them to pray instead of teaching them how to meditate. So all forms of religion basically tend to hope to bring up the next generation as seekers of truthfulness, as seekers of God, as seekers of an inner depth to life and having a moral life, and creating a more moral generation than the one before, through religious traditions and through prayer and through meditation, which was known in all the traditions for thousands of years. We know that in Jewish tradition we had meditation at least from the first Holy Temple over 2,000 years ago. We know that back then we had schools for meditation for even kids as young as 2 or 3 years old.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Wow.
And that with time, and the Talmud later on says that, also around 2,000 years ago, basically says, don't make your prayer, from your outside, or don't make your prayer a custom, or don't make your prayer just sort of an inertia move of your soul, but make it a real soul movement. Or in other words, like my rabbi used to say, my teacher used to say, don't, if you're the same person before and after the prayer, your prayer wasn't so effective. So we learn from those sayings basically that prayer should be a meditation. And unfortunately, what I've met through my life, and have turned me off many times from Judaism, then later on I saw that other religions struggle with it too. But within our tradition, within our culture, many times I've seen that prayer is something that needs to be done 3 times a day, not something that you want to do 3 times a day. So I would say then comes the part that you want, oh, the sun came out. That's nice.
I told you.
Thank you, God, for a ray of sun. Thank you for the winter and the rain too. So then comes the part. So you might say, okay, I don't need to force you to eat. But then we know that if I'm depressed, then you do need to force me to eat. Mm-hmm. So I think what happens is very similar. You can compare it to meditation. Mm-hmm. You don't eat meditation often enough. You don't meditate often enough. Mm-hmm. You become depressed. Mm-hmm. In other words, you disconnect from God. Mm. Disconnect from God, I mean you disconnect from your inner self, and you become more materialistic and less spiritual and less connected. So the more you become distant, the harder it is to come back to meditation.
That's true. I used to do it like about, I don't know, 20 years ago. I used to meditate, but I thought that it was like an alternative to doing yoga or or doing aerobics, or I didn't really see it as accomplishing anything different than that. Just a calming. It was calming.
Right. So it says about prayer, and I feel like it just goes, like when you think about it in terms of meditation, just compares so perfectly and makes you understand it so deeply, that it says about prayer that if you leave me for one day, I will leave you for 2 days. So it's not like a punishment. It's more like I heard someone say they went on um, they parted from each other for 6 months, a long distance relationship. They had a long distance relationship for about 6 months. He said for the 6 months that we were apart, it took at least another 6 months to recreate, to rebuild our relationship. So I feel like that's so true about us and God, us and meditation, us and getting closer into deeper into our soul. Once you start meditating, you get deeper and deeper and deeper, just like, you know, scuba diving, I guess, right? You go deeper and deeper and deeper. If, like if you stick your nose out, then you have to start diving all the way, again, right?
True.
So, so in meditation, you don't want to lose the practice. You don't want to lose the accomplishments of yesterday, or even 3 times a day. You don't want to lose. You don't want to miss one period of meditation/prayer, not because you have to, but because it was recommended, in this case by Jewish tradition, to meditate, pray 3 times a day, because when you disconnect for more than that, for more than a period of a third of a day, it's already harder to go back into that consciousness.
What if you're not Jewish?
Same thing, I think.
Yeah.
Like we say, my house should be called the house of prayer for all nations. It's the fact that the Jewish people, I don't even like calling it the Jewish people. What we call it is the Israelites. And Israelites come from the words Israel, yes, Israel, but Israel. And who was the first Israel? Jacob was the first Israel. So basically, we'll learn from that Jacob, it's not that he was born as a third generation to a certain tradition, in this case, the Jewish tradition. He had his father Isaac, and on top of that, he had his grandfather Abraham. And yet, it wasn't enough that he was already, not an immigrant, um, not a beginner of anything. And yet, the Israelite starts from Jacob, from the third generation. The Jewish people are beginning to be counted as Jewish from Jacob, and yet he needed to convert also. It was not enough that he was Jacob. It was not enough that he was Jewish on the Jacob level. He needed to become Yisrael. God needed to add the name Yisrael to him. And what is the name Yisrael? It's combined of 2 words, Yashar El, which is straight with God. So he needed to straighten something out in his own soul. It was not enough for him to stay Jacob. He needed to transform also and become Yisrael. And we all need to do that in ourselves. So it's not about who you were born. It's not about who your mother or grandmother is. It's about what you do inside your soul. Do you become Yisrael? So when we say that my house should be called the house of all nations, we mean that everybody is welcome to come and become Yisrael. Everybody is welcome to come and serve God and use these amazing tools, those guided imagery, amazing tools, to bring themselves closer to an a spiritual revelation, a godly revelation, to find prophecy inside their hearts.
And meditation helps with this.
Exactly.
Do you need to go in with an intention, or how do you reach that? I haven't been able to really reach anything like that. Like, how do you reach that?
So the meaning of the word meditation, if we look closely, is actually concentration. That's what meditation is.
Mm-hmm.
And if we look at what prayer is in our semantics,
Mm-hmm.
in our terminology,
Mhm.
it's more like reading from the prayer book a bunch of words. So, but really what prayer is, it should allow us to find deeper levels in our consciousness. And meditation is the same.
Mhm.
So the words of the prayer book that we have, or the Psalms that are being read by the whole world,
Mhm.
are basically, and in the Jewish tradition, we have certain movements that we do during the prayer.
Mhm.
We sit down, we stand up.
Mhm.
When we stand up, it brings us to more awe. When we
Mhm.
sit down, it brings us to more serenity and more calmness. And
Mm.
those are all things that are integrated into the Jewish philosophy. What are the words that you should be saying in a more calm, serene way?
Mhm.
And what are the words that you should be guided to be at more awe with? So, where you should be facing, we want to face Jerusalem. We want to face the Holy Temple. When we face the Holy Temple, it brings us to a certain conscious of that I want to reach the Holy Temple within me. It's not about where I'm facing. It's that when I'm facing a certain thing, I'm facing you, I'm concentrated on your face, right? I'm facing you, I'm concentrated on the expressions of your face. Your face is telling me something, right?
Yeah.
And vice versa.
Right.
So when I'm facing Jerusalem, when I'm facing the Holy Temple, it's as if I'm not in Israel, I'm facing Israel. If I'm in Israel, the traditions, I'm facing Jerusalem. If I'm in Jerusalem, I'm facing the Holy Temple. So it's in my consciousness, it brings me a step closer to where I want to be. So I'm looking towards Israel. I'm looking towards Jerusalem, which is holier level of just being within the boundaries of Israel.
Mhm.
Then I'm facing something even holier, which is the Holy Temple within me. So we want to guide ourselves and the whole world to not give up on looking for that Holy Temple within me. And I'm using all those guiding imagery tools to guide me to that level of consciousness.
So I should be focusing on reaching the holy part of myself, the holy, blessed part of myself. And where does reaching God fit into this? Is there something that we're trying to attain as well? A connection to God?
Obviously. Well, you see, we could be discussing, and I think the religious world versus the scientific world,
Mm-hmm.
the whole discussion between science and religion
Mm-hmm.
has maybe not done such a great service to God and to us eventually also. Because we could be discussing forever what God is and where is God, and what is our belief system. So first of all, I think that prayer and meditation is very much um, is a tool to put order into my world. So we talk a lot about God,
Mm-hmm.
and I talk to a lot of religious people, and many religious people are not so sure that even if they pray 3 times a day, they're not so sure how much they really believe in God, and they're not so sure how much, what it is that they believe in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I believe in God because I was brought up a certain way. I'm
Mm-hmm.
taught to to repeat like a mantra, all these levels of belief that I was brought up to believe in.
Mm-hmm.
But what it is in my heart that I really believe in, I might have not ever dared to tell myself.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like if we compare it, in Judaism, we also talk a lot about comparing our relationship to God to our relationship with between parents and children, or between husband and wife,
Mm-hmm.
or between master and servant, or you could say king and servant, whatever, or brother and sister. So there are many ways of looking at it. I just want to take one part right now, is the husband and wife. So the husband and wife, or the lovers, it actually talks about lovers. And if we look at the Song of Songs, it's very erotic, and it's very much about lovers.
Mm-hmm.
So our relationship with God has to be, in a certain way, very much like lovers.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be so intimate. And one of the main things, as a counselor I've seen, is that people don't have the guts to tell each other what it really is that they're feeling towards each other. We're living in an era when 80% of the people who don't get divorced stay in a emotionally frozen stage, I would say,
Mm-hmm.
in an emotional disconnect.
Mm-hmm.
So, or at least have maybe gone through some phases like that in their relationship, marriage.
Mm-hmm.
So, why is it, I think, that people don't really dare, even before they, get married, to have, that just genuine discussion? What do we really feel towards each other? And also later in life, even if they really were completely in love with each other before, and things happen, and sometimes you drift apart. And if you could just, come and say, yeah, we've drifted apart, we want to come back to each other, or we've drifted apart and we don't want to come back to each other, whatever it is, but just have that real discussion. So, very much like that in our relationship with God. Can I tell God, God, I've drifted apart and I don't want to ever see you again, in my prayer? There's a beautiful story in our in our Hasidic tradition, about a person who was very, very poor. He used to bring the water to the synagogue at 4 a.m. for people to wash their hands before they pray, because there's a tradition that we need to wash our hands before we pray. And 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 so he brought the water, and every time he would, stand before even everybody got to synagogue, he would sit behind and pray, and say, God, please, like, my wife was so beautiful, now she's so depressed, life has been so hard, my kids are hungry, can't you take care of us? And years go by, and he's really tired of the whole thing, but he really keeps on going. And then one day he finds 2,000 rubles lying on the ground. Comes to shul before everybody, finds those 2,000 rubles, picks them up, goes in, prays like with so much joy, like he hasn't prayed with in so many years, and so full of gratitude. And then he goes home. He comes back in the afternoon for the afternoon service, evening service, and he sees a commotion. And he asks what's going on, and they tell him, this Avramala, who was a very acknowledged and appreciated congregant, died.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody thought he was very rich.
Mm-hmm.
Turns out he was very poor, and he left a lot of debts behind him, and a few orphans who have no bread. And the community put together 2,000 rubles to give to the widow. And the widow lost the 2,000 rubles. So he goes, my gosh, like, those are the 2,000 rubles I found. What do I do now? And he goes into synagogue, and he throws the prayer book on the floor. And he screams at God, I don't ever want to talk to you again, ever. What kind of a cruel God are you? That for me to get 2,000 rubles, you need to take it from a widow? So then when is he telling this story? He's telling the story. So then he basically goes home and he cries. He covers himself under the pillow. He sticks his head under the pillow, and he can't get himself out of there. And he cries and he cries and he cries and he's like says, God, I don't ever want to talk to you. Like, I don't understand you. Like, it's, what kind of a God are you? And then suddenly he hears a voice inside him saying, don't you know? Like, you know what you need to do. You know that you need to go and return those 2,000 rubles. They're not yours.
Right.
So he says, all of a sudden, I felt like the greatest strength and the greatest joy inside me. And I just ran and I gave the money back with so much joy I cannot explain. And he says, and when he tells the story at a party that he put together to celebrate that he heard God's voice. So he says, like, we don't know, we just don't know. And I cannot explain to you what it is to hear the voice of God telling me what I need to do is uncomparable to the poverty and the misery and the agony of not having the 2,000 rubles,
Right.
dollars, whatever to begin with, and losing them. Hearing God's voice telling me what I need to do compensates for all that. So we are living in a very forceful relationship with God. If we look at the tradition of Abraham sacrificing Isaac, he says there's a tradition that talks, or commentators that talk about Abraham basically having two voices in him. The voice that tells him to sacrifice Isaac based on the psychology and the sociological world that he was living in, where everybody was sacrificing their children to the Molech, to the idol worshiping, to the idol, and that's what he was surrounded with, and he was preaching against it. Then one day something hits him on the head, and he goes to do the same. So there's a commentary that talks about him basically, or each one of us having those two voices inside us, and we need to learn to separate the voices, which is a godly voice and which is not.
Does meditation help with that?
That is exactly what meditation is for. That is exactly what prayer is for.
To listen to that real, authentic voice.
Exactly.
Wow. To be able to recognize that real, authentic voice. Wow. Now there's mindful meditation. And with mindful meditation, it's more like a practice to go inside and recognize your different attributes and refine and learn to control and not be so reactive to everything that's happening around you. Is Jewish meditation, is that like part of the Jewish meditative experience?
So I would compare it to the 5 levels of the soul that we have in Jewish tradition. That we have what we call Naran Chai, which is basically Nefesh, Ruach, Neshama, Chaya, and Yechida.
Right.
Which is basically 5 levels of our consciousness. So now these days we already have that. We have neurons in our stomach, in our guts, and we have neurons in our
everywhere.
Exactly, basically. And we have, we're so much more aware of how the body and the soul connect. And we have memory in our muscles. We have we don't only think with our head, we think with our body.
Mm.
So the first time we meet that in Jewish tradition is when King David says, my legs are taking me to, I don't remember the whole phrase right now, but he says, my legs are taking me to the holy temple, to the synagogue, basically, to the base medrash. My legs are taking me, like, it doesn't matter where I'm walking, my legs are intuitively taking me to holiness, in other words.
Wow. Wow.
So the question is, to what extent have I built a relationship with myself? To what extent I've made my I've moved in my personal growth, that if I want to be angry, I don't manage to be angry anymore, because I'm completely given to my deeper levels of consciousness, that I just know that exactly what. It's not that I, don't get angry, because if I get angry, my blood pressure will go up, right? It's not on that level of an inner battle anymore. It's that I'm connected on such a deep level that just nothing, well, I need to get angry here. Obviously, there's been a situation here that maybe, deserves anger.
Right.
But I'm already on that level of consciousness that I'm not going to get angry. When am I going to get angry? When, where anger is provoked by something that for which anger was created. So anger, it says, was created for us to come forth or be there for when we see somebody else being hurt, not for when we're being hurt. Because when we're being hurt, it's our ego waking up. But really, it says God created anger for us to support each other. Then we know if my anger is justified or not. If I really want, when I'm able, it's you see, religion talks very much about conquering our egos in a very, now you could say it's dogmatic, but it's not only dogmatic, but it's so it's so integrated into our thought, and a lot of us have been very wounded by that kind of speech of like, don't be this and don't be that, because God doesn't want you to be this or that. But it wasn't explained on a level that God doesn't want you to be that because it's not healthy for you. God doesn't want you to be that because God wants you to be happy. So now I know that it brings up my blood pressure, it brings up my cortisol, and it makes me unhealthy, and it ruins my immune system and all that. Why do we need to grow up to be 40, 50, 60 to realize that? Why can't we bring up our children in a way that they will be able to identify the connection between their soul and body and see how things implement negative effect?
Some would say it's the ego culture that we live in that promotes that kind of a thing and prevents us from really teaching our children what they really need to know in many areas.
Right. We're still very much driven by that awe upbringing.
Yeah.
A fearful God, or an angry God, or a forceful God. And it's not working anymore. Yeah. We have to change our narrative into a loving God, into a God that is giving us tools to become healthier on all 5 levels of our existence.
And that meditation, I think meditation is also useful for that. I think people are discovering that through meditation. You have more people seeing the good God, because they're going inside.
right? But in religious upbringing, I can definitely testify for myself, being brought up by sit down now in the prayer book, stand up there in the prayer book, like,
And
don't,
why? You don't even know why you're
and
doing
you
it.
don't even know why you're doing it. But if you come and you say, like these words can bring serenity into your life now.
Oh, I know.
And when you sit down,
Yeah.
what is lashevet, to sit down in Hebrew? Comes from the word yeshuva dad, which is serene or serenity.
Mm-hmm.
So if we explain it in that way to whoever wants to be more close, and our children and people who are getting closer in their older age, to what it actually, why it is, and what it actually does to our consciousness, wouldn't it be so much more effective to our meditation, to getting closer to God?
Thank you so much, Miriam. You've answered many questions. Now, when I meditate tomorrow morning, I'll have a different perspective on what I'm doing.
Thank you.
We should do this again.
Amen.
Do like the Buddhists do. They put their